I'm Gabriella, 34 female. I live in a quiet high-rise apartment that overlooks the city, a place I earned through relentless hard work and a stubborn refusal to fail. By day, I'm the vice president of operations for a national logistics company, a job that's as demanding as it is rewarding. My life is structured, predictable, and entirely my own, a stark contrast to the chaotic family drama I've always tried to keep at arm's length. This story is about the time that drama came crashing into my professional life, forcing me to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, the people who should lift you up are the ones holding you down. It's about a family reunion I was told not to attend, a perfect fiancé who was anything but, and the moment I had to choose between being the dutiful daughter and the boss I truly am. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was unwinding from a 12-hour workday. The city lights twinkled below my window, a silent testament to the life I'd built for myself, brick by painful brick. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, displaying a name that brought a familiar mix of love and anxiety. Dad. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming, and answered with a practiced cheerfulness. "Hey, Dad, how are you?" "Gabriella," he started, his tone clipped and devoid of warmth. There was no, "How are you?" no pleasantries. Arthur was a man who valued efficiency, especially when he had something on his mind that he deemed more important than his daughter's feelings. "I'm calling about the family reunion next month, the one Margaret is hosting." A small knot tightened in my stomach. Aunt Margaret's annual reunion was one of the few family events I genuinely looked forward to. Her home was a sanctuary of warmth and acceptance, a stark contrast to the judgment I often felt from my own father. "Of course," I said. "I've already RSVP'd to her. I'm really looking forward to it." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line, a sound I knew all too well. It was the sigh of disapproval, the preamble to a lecture. "About that," he said slowly, "I think it might be better if you sat this one out." I froze, the glass of water in my hand forgot. "What? Why? Is everything okay with Aunt Margaret?" "Margaret is fine," he snapped, his impatience growing. "This isn't about her, it's about Jessica and Leo." Jessica, my older cousin, and her fiancé, Leo, the family's golden couple. I tried to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "What about them?" "Leo is going to be there," Dad said, as if this was a grand revelation. "He's finally meeting the whole extended family. This is a very important day for Jessica. She wants everyone to see how well she's done for herself." I blinked, completely lost. "Okay, and how does my being there interfere with that? I love Jessica. I'd be happy to celebrate with her." Another sigh, this one longer and more theatrical. "Gabriella, please try to understand. Leo is very successful. He's a regional director at a major corporation. He's charismatic, he's ambitious, he's going places. He's the kind of man Jessica deserves." Every word was a carefully aimed dart. I knew what he was leaving unsaid. I was 34, single, and dedicated to a career he never bothered to understand. In his eyes, I was a failure in the ways that mattered most to him, marriage and traditional feminine success. My cousin Jessica, who had floated from one part-time job to another until landing her current role as a luxury brand ambassador. A title that seemed to involve little more than posting pictures of gifted handbags on social media, was the success story because she had landed a man like Leo. "I'm not sure I see the problem, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The problem," he said, his voice dropping as if he were sharing a difficult but necessary truth, "is that we don't want any awkwardness. When people ask you what you do, what are you going to say? That you're some kind of office manager? We don't want Leo to feel uncomfortable. We don't want him looking at our side of the family and seeing you and thinking less of Jessica." The cruelty of it knocked the air out of my lungs. An office manager. After years of grinding, of late nights and early mornings, of sacrificing personal time to climb the corporate ladder, that's all he thought I was. He had never once asked for my actual title. He just knew I worked in a big building and sat behind a desk. To him, I was a nobody, a potential embarrassment next to the blinding success of a man he had never even met. "Dad," I started, trying to keep my voice from trembling with rage. "I am not an office manager, and the idea that my presence would somehow tarnish Jessica's image is." "It's just for the best, Gabriella," he cut me off, his tone final. "It will be a day for celebrating real success. We don't want you feeling left out or comparing yourself. It would be better for everyone, you included, if you just made an excuse. Say you have to work. It's believable enough." Believable because, in his mind, my work was my only defining feature, and a dreary, unimportant one at that. The call ended soon after, leaving me in stunned silence. The city lights that had seemed so beautiful moments before now felt mocking. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn my father's respect, chasing a level of success he couldn't ignore. But I had failed to understand a fundamental truth. My success would never matter to him because it wasn't the kind he valued. He didn't see a vice president. He saw an unmarried daughter, a spinster, a nobody. And he was willing to cast me aside to protect the fragile image of the perfect family his niece had supposedly built. I sank onto my couch, the insult coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. He didn't want me there. Fine. But the thought of Leo, this paragon of success, this man whose comfort was more important than my feelings, began to fester. Little did my father know, he had just handed me all the motivation I would ever need. In the weeks following that phone call, my family's group chats and social media feeds became a shrine to Jessica and Leo. It was as if their upcoming appearance at the reunion was the social event of the century. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, and a woman of profound common sense, called me a day after my conversation with my father. Her tone was gentle. "Your dad called me," she said, sighing softly. "He told me you wouldn't be able to make it to the reunion because of a work commitment. Gabriella, you know you're always welcome. Is everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Aunt Margaret was the family's Switzerland, the neutral party everyone trusted. She was a retired school principal who had a built-in detector for nonsense. "Everything's fine, Aunt Margaret, just a lot on my plate at work." She didn't press, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "Well, if your schedule clears up, my door is always open. No questions asked." Her kindness was a balm, but it couldn't erase the sting of my father's words. I stayed in the family group chat, lurking in silence, as a cascade of messages painted a picture of a man I was beginning to despise without ever having met him. My cousin Jessica would post carefully curated photos of them at exclusive restaurants, on weekend getaways to wine country, or on a yacht belonging to one of Leo's important colleagues. Each photo was accompanied by a caption gushing about his ambition, his drive, and his impeccable taste. "Leo just closed a huge deal for his company." One caption read, under a photo of them clinking champagne glasses. "So proud to be by the side of a man who is changing the game. Power couple boss life." My father would be the first to comment. "That's my future nephew-in-law, a real go-getter, a man of substance." It was nauseating. The pedestal they placed him on was so high, it was a wonder he didn't get a nosebleed. According to the family grapevine, which was fed primarily by Jessica and amplified by my father, Leo was a rising star. He managed a massive territory for his company, overseeing dozens of employees and multi-million-dollar projects. He was apparently on the fast track to a senior executive position. He was brilliant, respected, and most importantly, he made a lot of money. This last part was often whispered with a sense of reverence, as if his salary was a measure of his soul. I tried to ignore it, to mute the conversations and focus on my own life, but it was impossible. My father would call me under the guise of checking in, but the conversation would inevitably pivot back to Leo. "Leo is taking Jessica to Paris for her birthday," he'd announce. "He says it's important to experience different cultures, a very worldly young man." Or I was talking to Leo on the phone the other day. He's so good about calling me, and he was telling me about the leadership seminar he's attending. The company is investing a lot in him. They know talent when they see it. Each statement was a thinly veiled comparison. I had just returned from a business trip to Frankfurt, a detail I didn't bother sharing. He wouldn't have cared. My work was just work. Leo S. was an epic saga of corporate conquest. I was the drab, gray background against which their glittering success could truly shine. The worst part was seeing how Jessica had changed. Growing up, Jessica and I had been close. She was always more interested in fashion and boys, while I was buried in books, but there was an easy affection between us. Now, she seemed to have fully absorbed the role of the future corporate wife. She spoke differently, with a kind of practiced, airy confidence. She name-dropped brands and vacation spots, and she always found a way to steer the conversation back to Leo's incredible career. One evening, I made the mistake of answering a video call from her. She was showing off a new diamond bracelet. "It's a little pre-anniversary gift from Leo," she cooed, twisting her wrist so the diamonds caught the light. "He's just so thoughtful. He says a woman of my caliber deserves to be adorned." I forced a smile. "It's beautiful, Jess." "Isn't it? Oh, Dad told me you can't make the reunion. That's such a shame. I was really hoping you could finally meet Leo. I'm sure you two would have so much to talk about." The pause was deliberate, her eyes scanning my simple apartment in the background. The implication was clear. What could someone like me possibly have to say to someone like him? "I'm sure," I said, my voice flat. "Well, you'll just have to see the pictures. I'm hiring a photographer for the day. Leo says it's important to document these family milestones. He's all about creating a legacy, you know." A legacy? They were building a legacy, while I was apparently building a collection of takeout containers and overdue library books. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time. The image they had constructed of Leo was flawless, a monument to modern success. He was a provider, a leader, a visionary. But it all felt hollow. It was too perfect, too polished. It was a story, and I've learned in my line of work that the best stories are often the ones used to hide the biggest problems. The pedestal they had built for him was made of lies, but I just didn't know what they were yet. The more they praised him, the more a single, dangerous thought took root in my mind. No one is that perfect. My company, a logistics and supply chain giant named Veridian Dynamics, was a sprawling ecosystem of warehouses, shipping routes, and thousands of employees. As the VP of operations, my job was to see the entire board, ensuring all the pieces moved in harmony. I rarely dealt with individual employees unless they were senior executives or part of a major operational issue. My days were filled with data analysis, strategic planning, and high-level meetings. I lived in a world of spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and performance metrics. It was in this world of cold, hard data that the first crack in Leo's perfect facade appeared. It happened on a Thursday, about 2 weeks before the dreaded reunion. I was in my office reviewing the quarterly performance reports for all our regional divisions. It was a tedious but necessary task, allowing me to identify which regions were excelling and which were lagging. My eyes were glazing over from columns of numbers and color-coded charts when I got to the Midwest region. It was a sea of red, missed targets, declining efficiency metrics, and a notable spike in client complaints. It was, to put it mildly, a dumpster fire. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. The Midwest had historically been a solid, if not stellar, performer. This kind of nosedive was alarming. I clicked open the personnel file for the region to see who was in charge, my mind already preparing to schedule a conference call to demand answers. And that's when I saw it. The name at the top of the regional leadership chart listed as the regional director. Leo Martinez. I blinked, certain my eyes were deceiving me. I leaned back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a slow hiss. Leo. It couldn't be, it had to be a coincidence. Leo was a common name. But then I clicked on his employee profile. The photo that loaded was unmistakably the same man from Jessica's social media posts, smug smile, perfectly coiffed hair, and the air of unearned confidence that I now realized was pure arrogance. The company listed was Veridian Dynamics, my company. For a moment, I just stared. The entire narrative my family had built around this man, the corporate superstar, the game changer, the man of substance, began to crumble. He wasn't a director at some vague, impressive-sounding major corporation. He was a director here, at my company, and based on the report glowing red on my screen, he was a failing one. A slow, cold fury began to build inside me. My father's words echoed in my head. He's a regional director. He's going places. We don't want him looking at our side of the family and seeing you. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were so busy worshiping his title that they never bothered to consider his actual performance. They had cast me as the family failure, the nobody who wasn't worthy of being in his presence, when in reality, he was my subordinate. And a spectacularly incompetent one at that. I took a deep breath, pushing my personal feelings aside and slipping into my professional role. This was no longer just a family issue, it was a business problem, a significant one. I pulled up the Midwest region's historical data. For the past 3 years under the previous director, the numbers were green across the board. Steady growth, high client satisfaction, excellent efficiency. Then, I filtered the data to the last 8 months, the exact period Leo had been in the role after his predecessor retired. The decline was immediate and catastrophic. Shipping deadlines were missed by an average of 48 hours. Warehouse inventory errors had tripled. Employee turnover in that region had skyrocketed by 40%. But the most damning evidence came from the client complaint logs. I started reading through the notes, and a clear pattern emerged. Clients complained of Leo's arrogance and dismissiveness. There were multiple accounts of him promising services we couldn't deliver, then blaming his own team when things went wrong. One major client, a national retail chain, had filed a formal complaint stating that Leo had been unprofessional and condescending during a critical negotiation, nearly causing them to pull their multi-million-dollar contract. The account had only been saved because a more experienced logistics manager under him had stepped in and smoothed things over. It was all there in black and white and glaring red ink. Leo wasn't a rising star, he was a liability. He was a classic case of someone who could talk a good game, who could charm his way through an interview, but who lacked the competence and character to actually lead. He was all style, no substance. The pedestal my family had built for him wasn't just based on lies, it was a complete fantasy. He wasn't the brilliant leader Jessica claimed he was. He was a failing middle manager who was single-handedly tanking one of my company's most important regions. I leaned back, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time that day. My father had wanted to shield his precious future son-in-law from the embarrassment of my meager existence. He had told me not to come to the reunion because I was a nobody compared to Leo. The truth was, Leo was the nobody. He was just a name on a performance report, a red flag in my system, and I was his boss. Not just his boss, but the vice president of operations. The person with the ultimate authority to review, reassign, or even terminate his employment. The reunion suddenly seemed like a much more interesting event. My father had uninvited me to protect Leo's ego. He had no idea that he had just given me the perfect opportunity to do my job. Once the initial shock wore off, a sense of cold, calculated clarity settled over me. This was bigger than just family drama. Leo's incompetence was a direct threat to my company's bottom line and my own professional reputation. As VP of Operations, I was ultimately responsible for the performance of every region under my purview, including his. His failures were, by extension, my failures. I couldn't let my personal feelings about my family cloud my professional judgment, but I also couldn't ignore the surreal intersection of my two worlds. I had to investigate this thoroughly, not as a scorned family member, but as a senior executive. The fact that any professional action I took would have dramatic personal repercussions was just a bonus. I decided to start by digging deeper, but discreetly. I didn't want to raise any alarms or give Leo a chance to cover his tracks. My first move was to look at his employment history and how he got the job in the first place. I pulled his file from HR. He had been with Veridian for 5 years, starting in a junior sales role. His promotions had been rapid, suspiciously so. He had a knack for schmoozing, and his previous supervisor's comments were filled with vague praise like great attitude and excellent people skills, but were conspicuously light on concrete achievements. The real red flag was his promotion to regional director. The hiring manager who had signed off on it was a senior executive who had taken an early retirement package just a month after Leo was appointed. It smelled like a favor, a final handshake deal on the way out the door. The other candidates for the position had far more experience and better track records. Leo had likely charmed his way into a job he was completely unqualified for. Next, I needed to understand the situation on the ground. I couldn't just rely on data, I needed human intelligence. I reached out to Sarah, the director of human resources, a sharp, no-nonsense woman I trusted implicitly. I framed my inquiry carefully. "Sarah," I said over a video call, "I'm doing a deep dive into the performance issues in the Midwest region. The numbers are deeply concerning. I was hoping you could discreetly pull the exit interview transcripts for all employees who have resigned from that division in the last 6 months. I want to see if there are any common themes." I didn't mention Leo by name. I didn't need to. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I've already noticed the turnover spike there, Gabriella. I'll get you the files by end of day. Confidentiality assured." As promised, the files arrived in my secure inbox that afternoon. I spent the next 2 hours reading through them, and the picture they painted was grim. The transcripts were a chorus of complaints, all centered around Leo. Former employees described him as a micromanager with no strategic vision, a boss who takes all the credit and assigns all the blame, and more interested in his golf game than in meeting client needs. Several of them mentioned his habit of making inappropriate jokes and creating a toxic boys' club atmosphere among his direct reports. One particularly damning account from a highly respected logistics manager who had been with the company for over a decade detailed how Leo had stolen his proposal for a new efficiency system, presented it as his own to corporate, and then botched the implementation, costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. The evidence was overwhelming. Leo wasn't just incompetent, he was a corrosive presence, actively driving away talented employees and alienating valuable clients. He was a fraud, wrapped in a designer suit and a charming smile. The final piece of the puzzle came from an anonymous submission to the company's internal ethics hotline, which was automatically flagged to me and HR due to the keywords used. The report, filed just a week prior, alleged that a director in the Midwest region was manipulating his team's expense reports, claiming personal dinners and entertainment as client meetings. While the report didn't name Leo directly, it was obvious who it was referring to. The ethics department had already launched a preliminary, low-level investigation. I now had a complete picture, supported by performance data, exit interviews, and a formal ethics complaint. I had everything I needed to justify a severe disciplinary action, up to and including termination. The professional path was clear. I needed to act decisively to stop the bleeding in the Midwest region. But the personal path was far more complicated. I thought about the upcoming reunion. I imagined Leo standing there, accepting my family's fawning praise while I knew the truth. I pictured my father boasting about his brilliant future son-in-law. I saw Jessica, beaming with pride, completely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé's entire career was a house of cards. My initial plan had been to simply handle this at work, call Leo to headquarters, present the evidence, and let HR take it from there. But my father's words kept ringing in my ears. A nobody. An embarrassment. He had tried to exclude me to elevate a man who was, by every professional metric, a complete failure. The injustice of it all burned. A simple termination felt too clean, too private. It wouldn't teach my family, especially my father, the lesson they so desperately needed to learn. They had made this public by making Leo the centerpiece of their family gathering. They had created the stage. I decided it was time to write the script for the final act. I would go to the reunion, and I would give Leo his performance review in person. The day of the reunion arrived cloaked in a brilliant, sunny sky that did nothing to mirror the storm brewing inside me. My decision to attend felt both terrifying and liberating. For days, I had debated with myself. The professional, detached part of me, the VP of operations, insisted that mixing family and business was a terrible idea. It was messy, unpredictable, and could have unforeseen consequences. But the other part of me, the daughter who had been dismissed and insulted, demanded to be heard. This wasn't just about an underperforming employee anymore. It was about respect. It was about reclaiming my place in a family that had tried to write me out of the picture. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for battle. It wasn't a power suit or anything overtly corporate. That would be too obvious. Instead, I opted for an elegant, understated navy blue dress, one that was professional yet relaxed. It was the kind of dress that said, "I am comfortable in my own skin, and I belong here." I paired it with simple jewelry and low heels. My goal was not to intimidate, but to project an aura of quiet, unshakable confidence. I drove to Aunt Margaret's house, my hands steady on the steering wheel. Her home was in a leafy, quiet suburb, the kind of place where neighbors still wave to each other. As I pulled into her long driveway, I could see the party was in full swing. Cars lined the street, and the sound of laughter and music drifted from the backyard. I took one last, deep breath, centered myself, and got out of the car. Walking up the stone path to the backyard felt like walking onto a stage. A few distant cousins nodded hello, their faces showing a flicker of surprise at my presence. I smiled back, my demeanor calm and pleasant. I saw Aunt Margaret first. She was arranging a platter of desserts, and her face broke into a wide, genuine smile when she saw me. "Gabriella, you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug. "Your schedule cleared up after all. I'm so happy you're here." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Aunt Margaret," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. Over her shoulder, I saw my father, Arthur. He was standing in a small circle with my uncle and a few other relatives. When he spotted me, his smile froze and his eyes widened in disbelief, by a flash of pure anger. He excused himself from the group and marched toward me, his movements stiff. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so only I and Aunt Margaret could hear. "I told you it would be better if you didn't come." Before I could respond, Aunt Margaret stepped between us, her expression disapproving. "Arthur, for heaven's sake, this is a family party. Gabriella is your daughter. Of course, she is welcome here." My father looked flustered, but he held his ground. "This is supposed to be a special day for Jessica and Leo. I didn't want any complications." "The only complication I see is your attitude," Aunt Margaret retorted, her principal's voice leaving no room for argument. She turned back to me, her eyes softening. "Go get a plate, dear. Mingle. I'll handle your father." She led him away, and I watched them go, a small sense of victory warming my chest. One obstacle down. I scanned the crowd, my eyes searching for the man of the hour. It didn't take long to find him. Leo was holding court near the barbecue pit, a beer in one hand, the other gesturing grandly as he told some story. A group of my relatives, including my cousin Jessica, were hanging on his every word, laughing at all the right moments. He looked exactly like his profile picture, handsome, tanned, and radiating a slick, practiced charm. He was dressed in expensive-looking linen pants and a crisp polo shirt, the very picture of off-duty corporate success. Jessica was clinging to his arm, looking up at him with pure adoration. It was a perfectly staged scene. I decided to bide my time. I didn't want to cause a scene immediately. The key to my plan was control. I needed the right moment, the right audience. So I did as Aunt Margaret suggested. I mingled. I caught up with cousins I hadn't seen in years. I complimented my aunt on her beautiful garden. I acted as if my presence was the most natural thing in the world. I could feel my father's eyes on me from across the yard, his glare a physical weight, but I ignored him. After about an hour, I saw my opportunity. The main meal was winding down, and people were gathering in small, relaxed groups. Leo, Jessica, and my father had taken seats at a large patio table, along with a few other key family members. It was the de facto head table. It was time. With a placid smile on my face, I picked up my glass of iced tea and began to walk toward them. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my steps were even and deliberate. This was it. The performance was about to begin. I approached the table with a serene smile, my movements calm and unhurried. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice pleasant. Jessica looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. My father, Arthur, scowled openly. But Leo, ever the charming host in training, flashed a brilliant white smile. "Of course, the more the merrier. I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Leo." He extended a hand, his grip firm and confident. "Gabriella," I replied, taking his hand briefly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," he said with a self-satisfied chuckle. "It's certainly been comprehensive," I said, letting the word hang in the air for a moment before taking a seat. My father cleared his throat, eager to steer the conversation onto his preferred topic. "Leo was just telling us about the big expansion project he's spearheading in the Midwest. A huge responsibility. The company has a lot of faith in him." Leo leaned back in his chair, basking in the attention. "Well, when you deliver results, they tend to give you more rope. It's a high-pressure environment, but that's where I thrive. You have to be aggressive, innovative. The old ways of doing things just don't cut it anymore." I took a slow sip of my iced tea, holding his gaze over the rim of the glass. "That's so interesting you say that, Leo. I'm actually very familiar with Viridian dynamics." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, really? Small world." "Smaller than you think," I said smoothly. "In fact, I follow the Midwest region's performance quite closely. From what I've seen, the numbers have been concerning. A 40% spike in employee turnover, a threefold increase in inventory errors, and a significant drop in client retention over the last 2 quarters. That doesn't exactly scream results." The color drained from Leo's face. Jessica looked confused, glancing between me and her fiancé. My father's expression hardened. "Gabriella, what are you talking about? This is hardly the time or place to be discussing business statistics." "I disagree, Dad," I said, my voice remaining level and calm. "You were the one who said this reunion was for celebrating real success. I just want to make sure we're all clear on what that looks like. Tell me, Leo, what would you say is the biggest contributing factor to the Midwest's recent decline?" Leo sputtered, trying to regain his composure. "Look, I don't know who your source is, but those numbers are taken out of context. Every region goes through transitional periods. We're restructuring. It's part of a long-term strategy." "A strategy that involves losing your largest client in the region?" I countered, raising an eyebrow. "I read the file on that. The client cited unprofessional and condescending behavior from the regional director as the primary reason for their intent to terminate the contract. Luckily, a more experienced manager managed to salvage the account. Is that part of the restructuring plan, too, alienating key partners?" The entire table was silent now. The ambient party noise seemed to fade into the background. Jessica's adoring smile had been replaced with a look of dawning horror. "Leo, what is she talking about?" Leo shot me a look of pure venom. "She has no idea what she's talking about. She's just some office worker trying to stir up trouble." My father jumped to his defense. "Exactly. Gabriella, this is completely inappropriate. You don't understand how things work at that level. You're embarrassing yourself." I turned my calm, unwavering gaze to my father. "Am I, Dad? You've always been so impressed with Leo's title, Regional Director. It sounds very important, but you never once asked me what my title was. You just assumed I was a nobody." I let that sink in before turning back to a pale, sweating Leo. "It's funny you mention my source. My source is the quarterly performance report that I personally review. My source is the HR exit interview transcripts that are flagged to my office. My source is the ethics complaint about expense report fraud that is currently under active investigation. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a crisp, professional tone. You see, Leo, at Veridian Dynamics, a regional director reports to a vice president. And since I am the vice president of operations for the entire country, that means you report to me. So, I guess you could say, I am my own source. The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica stared at me, her mouth hanging open. My father looked as if I had physically struck him, and Leo looked like a cornered animal. This is your performance review, Leo, I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. And you are failing. Spectacularly. You're not a rising star, you're a liability. You're not a leader, you're a fraud who takes credit for the work of others. The pedestal this family put you on is built on nothing but lies. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly on the table. You and I will be having a more formal conversation on Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I suggest you don't be late. As for the rest of you, I said, my eyes sweeping over my stunned family, I hope you've enjoyed this celebration of success. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving a crater of shocked silence in my wake. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they were thinking. The truth was out. The performance was over. Walking away from that table felt like shedding a skin I had been wearing my entire life, the skin of the daughter who was never quite good enough. I didn't stay long after the confrontation. I found Aunt Margaret, gave her a hug, and thanked her for hosting. She just squeezed my hand, her eyes full of a deep, unspoken understanding. You take care of yourself, Gabriella, she whispered. I nodded and left, the engine of my car a low hum in the quiet suburban street. The fallout began before I even got home. My phone started buzzing relentlessly. A string of furious texts from Jessica, alternating between disbelief and accusation. How could you do that to him? You ruined everything. You're just jealous of my happiness. I read them, felt a brief pang of what might have been pity, and then I blocked her number. There was nothing left to say. Then came the call from my father. I let it go to voicemail. He left a rambling, angry message, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He called me cruel, vindictive, and told me I had shamed the entire family. He didn't mention that I was right. He didn't acknowledge that he had been boasting about a fraud. He only cared about the public embarrassment. I deleted the message without a second thought. The most telling silence W. As from Leo, he didn't call, he didn't text. He knew he had no ground to stand on. Monday morning arrived, and at 9 a.m. sharp, a video call request from Leo appeared on my screen. When I answered, the man on the other side was a shadow of the charismatic figure from the party. He was pale, his eyes were bloodshot, and his usual arrogance had been replaced by a quiet dread. Sarah from HR was also on the call, a neutral and professional presence. I kept the meeting brief and to the point. Leo, I began, my tone strictly business, this call is a formality. As we discussed, your performance has been unacceptable. We have documented cases of gross mismanagement, client endangerment, and as of this morning, the Ethics Committee has found conclusive evidence of expense report fraud. Your employment with Veridian Dynamics is terminated, effective immediately. He didn't argue, he didn't protest. He just nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on some point beyond his screen. I understand, he mumbled. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, I felt not a sense of triumph, but a sense of quiet, final closure. A problem had been identified, investigated, and resolved. It was just another day at the office. The weeks that followed were a period of recalibration, both personally and professionally. At work, I appointed a competent and experienced internal candidate as the interim director for the Midwest region, and within a month, the numbers already started to stabilize. The bleeding had stopped. In my personal life, the shifts were more like tectonic plates moving. Jessica and Leo, unsurprisingly, broke off their engagement. Once his real success vanished, so too did his appeal. Last I heard from Aunt Margaret, Jessica had moved to a new city to find herself. Her social media accounts suddenly silent. the most profound change was with my father. After a month of complete silence, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from him. His handwriting was shaky, the words chosen with a difficulty that was palpable even on the page. It wasn't a perfect apology. He didn't fully grasp the depth of the hurt he had caused over the years, but it was a start. He admitted he had been wrong, that he had been so blinded by the superficial idea of success that he had failed to see the real thing standing right in front of him. He wrote, "I don't know anything about your world, Gabriella, but I know you are strong, and I am, for the first time, truly proud of you." He asked if he could take me to dinner to start over. I haven't answered the letter yet. Some wounds need more time to heal. But for the first time, there is a possibility of a future where my father sees me for who I am, not for who he thinks I should be. The family dynamic is forever changed. Some relationships, like the one with my cousin, are likely broken for good. Others, like the one with my father, are tentatively on a path to being rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of expectation. As for me, I feel a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. I realized that my whole life I had been seeking validation from people who were never going to give it to me. The reunion, in its own disastrous way, set me free. I am not a nobody. I am not an embarrassment. I am Gabriella, the vice president of operations. I am a daughter, a niece, and a cousin. But most importantly, I am the woman who defines her own success, and I no longer need anyone else's approval to believe it.